Sometimes the storm that breaks you is the same wind that carries you home. True worth cannot be measured by eyes that see only surface, but by hearts that recognize strength. Elizabeth stands alone beside the weathered wooden church in the town of Red Rock, dressed in an old black dress that belonged to her late aunt, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers that have already begun to wilt under the scorching Arizona sun. She has traveled from distant Texas after her uncle's death, responding to a newspaper advertisement from Willem Carter, who sought a wife for his ranch. The dust swirls around her worn boots as she shifts her weight from one foot to the other, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The local preacher glances impatiently at his pocket watch, his weathered face creased with concern as the townspeople gather more from curiosity than celebration. Their whispered conversations drift through the dry air like tumbleweeds, speculation about the delayed groom mixing with barely concealed gossip about the woman from Texas who dared to answer a mail-order bride advertisement. When Willem finally appears on his Mustang, dust clouds trailing behind him, Elizabeth feels her stomach drop like a stone into a deep well. His cold blue eyes sweep over her with the calculating gaze of a cattle buyer examining livestock at market. The silence stretches between them like a taut rope ready to snap, while the assembled crowd holds its collective breath. Willem dismounts with deliberate slowness, his spurs jingling against the hard-packed earth. His voice cuts through the desert air like a knife when he speaks, loud enough for everyone to hear. He categorically refuses to take the marriage vows, declaring that she has deceived him in their correspondence regarding her appearance and claiming she is too heavy for the demanding work required on a ranch. The words strike Elizabeth like physical blows, each syllable designed to humiliate and diminish her before the entire town. The gathered crowd shifts uncomfortably, some averting their eyes while others lean forward with the morbid fascination of witnesses to a public execution. Elizabeth feels the heat of shame rise in her cheeks, but she forces herself to stand straight, her chin lifted with quiet dignity. Willem remounts his horse without another word, leaving Elizabeth standing under the merciless desert sun as the dust from his departure settles around her like the remnants of shattered dreams. The preacher clears his throat awkwardly, unsure how to address the unprecedented situation, while the townspeople begin to disperse, their whispered conversations following them like shadows. After Willem's rejection, Elizabeth walks past the crowd of spectators to an old bench beside the town well as the desert sun begins to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson that mirror the burning sensation in her chest. The townspeople gradually disperse, their footsteps echoing against the wooden boardwalks as they return to their evening routines, leaving behind only the lingering weight of their judgment and whispered speculations about her fate. Mrs. Perkins, the storekeeper's wife, approaches with tentative steps, her weathered hands clasped together in front of her faded calico dress. She offers Elizabeth shelter for the night, speaking in the gentle tone reserved for wounded animals, but Elizabeth politely declines with a shake of her head. Something deep within her rebels against accepting charity born of pity, even from well-meaning strangers who witnessed her public humiliation. As darkness falls over Red Rock, Elizabeth chooses instead to remain under the vast starlit sky, finding unexpected companionship when a lone coyote approaches her with cautious curiosity. The animal settles at a respectful distance, its yellow eyes reflecting the moonlight as it seems to recognize a kindred spirit in her solitude. The cold night wind of the desert cuts through her thin black dress, but instead of breaking her spirit, it seems to carry away her shame and despair like dust scattered by the breeze. Sitting on the rough wooden bench with her wilted bouquet forgotten beside her, Elizabeth remembers her uncle's words about how true strength comes not from what others think of you, but from how you choose to see yourself. His voice echoes in her memory, steady and reassuring like the rhythm of horse hooves on a familiar trail. He had always told her that a person's worth cannot be measured by the opinions of those who choose to look only at the surface. As the stars shine overhead in their eternal dance, Elizabeth feels an unexpected determination rising within her chest like the first light of dawn breaking over distant mountains. The humiliation she endured today begins to transform into something else entirely, a catalyst rather than a conclusion. She understands now that this moment of public rejection is not the end of her story, but rather the beginning of her own path, one that she will walk with dignity regardless of who chooses to accompany her on the journey ahead. Willem drags Elizabeth to the local saloon called the Golden Horseshoe, where he attempts to dispose of her like unwanted livestock before the assembled cowboys and prospectors who have gathered for their evening drinks. The smoke-filled establishment reeks of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed bodies, while the sound of clinking glasses and raucous laughter creates a cacophony that seems to mock her predicament. Oil lamps cast dancing shadows on the weathered wooden walls, creating an atmosphere that feels more like a courthouse trial than a place of business. Willem stands before the crowd with the arrogance of a man who believes he owns everything he touches, declaring loudly that he has the right to dispose of her since their marriage agreement was never completed. He treats her like merchandise at an auction, his voice booming over the jeers and crude comments of the intoxicated patrons who view her misfortune as entertainment for their evening revelries. Some lean back in their chairs with amused grins, while others make lewd suggestions about what they might do with such a prize. Elizabeth endures this trial with silent endurance, refusing to break under their cruelty even as her hands tremble slightly at her sides. She keeps her eyes fixed on a point beyond the crowd, drawing strength from some inner reserve that even she did not know existed until this moment. The laughter and catcalls wash over her like waves against a steadfast cliff, unable to erode the foundation of dignity she has chosen to build within herself. When a mysterious man in a worn black hat and long coat offers $50 for her, Elizabeth notices something different in his demeanor that sets him apart from the rest of the crowd. Unlike the others, he does not look at her with the calculating gaze of someone appraising property, but rather with something that resembles respect. The stranger, who introduces himself simply as Ethan, does not treat her as an object to be possessed, but instead offers her a choice that no one else has bothered to present. He speaks in a quiet voice that somehow carries over the noise of the saloon, telling her that she can come with him or stay, making it clear that the decision belongs to her alone. This simple gesture of acknowledging her agency represents the first genuine respect she has encountered since her arrival in Red Rock, and she finds herself studying his weathered face with new interest. Elizabeth leaves the saloon with Ethan, riding on his wagon through the desert canyons toward his homestead in the mountains as the stars emerge like scattered diamonds across the vast darkness above them. The wooden wheels creak rhythmically against the rocky trail, creating a steady cadence that seems to match the beating of her heart as she contemplates this leap into uncertainty. The cool night air carries the scent of sage and juniper, replacing the stale atmosphere of the saloon with something clean and honest. They travel in peaceful silence, neither demanding explanations nor offering promises, simply moving forward under the celestial canopy that has witnessed countless such journeys across this untamed landscape. Elizabeth finds herself stealing glances at her silent companion, noting the way he handles the reins with practiced ease and how his eyes constantly scan the horizon for potential dangers that might threaten their passage through this wilderness. Ethan reveals little about himself during their journey, sharing only that he maintains a modest house with the necessities for living and that he demands nothing from her except her own desire to be there. His words carry the weight of sincerity, spoken without the flowery language or false promises that she has learned to distrust from men who view women as objects to be acquired rather than human beings to be respected. When they reach his simple but well-maintained cabin built from weathered wood and native stone, Elizabeth feels something shift within her chest like the settling of dust after a long storm. The structure sits nestled against a rocky outcropping, protected from the harsh desert winds while offering a clear view of the valley below where wildflowers bloom in defiance of the arid climate. It is not relief or comfort that she experiences, but rather an awareness that she has arrived somewhere she will not be viewed with mockery or judgment. The simple gesture of his invitation to sit by the fire and his offer of coffee without any conditions attached begins to heal wounds that she had not even realized existed within her soul. As she settles onto a rough-hewn chair beside the crackling flames, Elizabeth watches Ethan move about his modest home with the quiet efficiency of a man who has learned to find contentment in simplicity. For the first time since leaving Texas, she allows herself to believe that perhaps her journey has led her not to another disappointment, but to a place where she might finally discover what it means to be valued for who she truly is rather than what others expect her to be. Days pass like pages turning in a well-worn book as Elizabeth and Ethan establish a quiet, respectful routine within the confines of their mountain cabin. The rhythm of their daily existence flows as naturally as water finding its course down a hillside, each task and moment fitting together with surprising harmony. Ethan proves to be a man of action rather than words, maintaining the fire and the stone hearth, tending to their simple meals, and respecting her personal space without making any demands or imposing his will upon her choices. Elizabeth finds herself naturally beginning to help with the household duties, mending torn clothing with careful stitches, preparing meals from their modest supplies of beans, cornmeal, and salt pork, and even singing softly while she works. Her voice fills the cabin with warmth that seems to seep into the very timbers of their home, creating an atmosphere of contentment that neither of them has experienced in years of solitary living. They share simple meals of cornbread and stew around the rough wooden table that Ethan built with his own hands, their conversations flowing easily despite the brevity of their acquaintance. In the evenings, Ethan reads by the flickering light of their oil lamp while Elizabeth sits in the comfortable chair he crafted specifically for her, working on small sewing projects or simply watching the flames dance in the fireplace. An Apache Indian named Eagle begins visiting their homestead, bringing gifts of freshly caught fish and wild herbs in exchange for coffee and conversation. He treats Elizabeth with the same delicate respect that Ethan shows her, speaking to her as an equal rather than a burden to be tolerated or property to be managed. His presence adds another layer of acceptance to her new life, making her feel for the first time in many years that she possesses genuine value as a human being. The three of them often sit together on the porch as the sun sets behind the distant mountains, sharing stories and watching the desert come alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures beginning their nightly hunts. Elizabeth discovers that she has developed a fondness for these peaceful moments when the harsh realities of survival give way to simple companionship and mutual understanding. In this remote corner of the Arizona Territory, surrounded by men who see her as more than the object of ridicule she had become in Red Rock, Elizabeth begins to remember what it feels like to laugh without fear of judgment and to speak without measuring every word for its potential to cause offense or disappointment. Willem returns with two companions, drunk and aggressive, demanding Elizabeth as his property and ordering her to return with him to complete their original arrangement. The confrontation unfolds during a desert storm when the wind howls through the canyon like the voices of angry spirits, whipping sand and debris against the cabin walls with relentless fury. Willem curses and degrades Elizabeth for her weight, calling her too fat and unattractive for any decent man to want, his words slurred by whiskey but sharp enough to cut like broken glass. His companions laugh at his cruel remarks, emboldened by alcohol and the pack mentality that transforms cowardly men into dangerous predators when they believe they have found easy prey. They surround the cabin like wolves circling a wounded deer, their hands resting on the handles of their revolvers in a clear threat of violence should their demands be refused. Ethan stands firm but calm in the doorway, his weathered hands steady at his sides as he makes it clear that he will not permit violence on his land while simultaneously offering Willem the opportunity to leave peacefully. His voice carries the quiet authority of a man who has faced death before and found it less frightening than living without honor or principle. The storm rages around them as if nature itself has chosen to mirror the intensity of their confrontation, lightning illuminating their faces in stark relief against the darkness while thunder drowns out the worst of Willem's drunken threats and insults. Elizabeth feels the familiar fear beginning to rise in her throat like bile, but this time something different happens within her spirit. She finds her voice and her strength, stepping out from behind Ethan to face Willem directly despite the danger his presence represents. Her words ring out clear and strong above the howling wind as she rejects his demands and declares that she would rather be alone and free than married and miserable. The transformation in her bearing is remarkable, as if the woman who arrived on the stagecoach has been replaced by someone who understands her own worth. Willem and his men finally retreat, defeated by her quiet dignity and the unwavering support of Ethan. Elizabeth feels a profound change within herself. She is no longer the frightened woman who stepped off the stagecoach in Red Rock. The storm begins to subside as they disappear into the darkness, leaving behind only the memory of their threats and the profound silence that follows moments of great change. With the arrival of spring, the relationship between Elizabeth and Ethan grows into something deeper than ordinary companionship, blossoming like the wildflowers that carpet the desert floor after the winter rains. The harsh edges of their initial caution have worn smooth through daily contact and shared experiences, replaced by an understanding that transcends the need for constant conversation or elaborate gestures of affection. Ethan carves Elizabeth, his initials, into the wooden gate of their small ranch, a simple but profound sign of belonging that speaks louder than any flowery declaration of love. The letters stand out clearly against the weathered wood, permanent markers of her place in this remote corner of the Arizona Territory where she has finally found acceptance and peace. One morning when the air carries the fresh scent of desert blooms and the promise of warmer days ahead, Ethan leads her to a creek in the canyon where cottonwood trees provide blessed shade from the already warming sun. The water flows clear and cold over smooth stones, creating a gentle music that seems to harmonize with the singing of birds hidden among the branches above their heads. Here beside the flowing water, Ethan makes his proposal of marriage, speaking not from duty or pity but from genuine desire to build a shared life together. His proposal carries the honest practicality of frontier living, free from romantic illusions but rich with sincere intention. He speaks of wanting to face the challenges of this harsh land together, to work the soil side by side, and to grow old together under the vast canopy of desert stars that have witnessed their courtship. Elizabeth accepts his proposal with full understanding that Ethan sees her true essence and loves her not despite her perceived flaws but because of her strength and honesty. She recognizes in his weathered face and calloused hands the character of a man who values substance over appearance, loyalty over passion, and partnership over possession. Their wedding ceremony takes place at sunset on a mesa overlooking their valley, with only the mountains as witnesses and Eagle offering his blessing by playing haunting melodies on his wooden flute from a rocky outcropping above. The Apache's music drifts down to them like a prayer carried on the evening breeze, sanctifying their union with the ancient traditions of the land they now call home. As they exchange simple vows of commitment and mutual respect, Elizabeth feels the final pieces of her broken heart settling into place like stones in a well-built foundation. Willem makes one last desperate attempt to reclaim Elizabeth, appearing alone and heavily intoxicated at the trading post, threatening and shouting about his imagined rights while waving his revolver in the air like a man possessed by demons. The news reaches their ranch through warnings from Mrs. Perkins and Eagle, both of whom have witnessed his erratic behavior and fear that his desperation has transformed him into something truly dangerous. Elizabeth and Ethan prepare for the possible confrontation with the calm efficiency of people who have learned to face adversity together rather than alone. They check their weapons, secure their livestock, and make plans for various scenarios while maintaining the steady composure that has carried them through previous trials and tribulations. When Willem arrives at their cabin during a fierce sandstorm with his revolver drawn and his eyes wild with alcohol and rage, Elizabeth makes the crucial decision to meet him face to face rather than hide behind her husband like a frightened child seeking protection. The wind howls around them like the voices of vengeful spirits, whipping sand and debris through the air with such force that visibility drops to mere yards. She steps out into the storm and speaks to Willem with unwavering confidence, her voice cutting through the chaos of wind and sand as she forces him to confront the emptiness and regret that violence will leave in its wake. Her words carry the weight of hard-won wisdom, spoken by a woman who has discovered her own strength through trials that would have broken someone with less determination. Elizabeth tells him that revenge and violence will bring him nothing but hollow victory and lasting remorse, that forcing someone to stay against their will creates prisoners rather than companions. She speaks of the difference between love and possession, between partnership and ownership, concepts that his alcohol-clouded mind struggles to comprehend but cannot entirely dismiss. Broken by her words and his own failures, Willem falls to his knees in the sand, his revolver dropping from nerveless fingers as he finally acknowledges defeat in this battle that was lost from the very beginning. The storm begins to subside as if responding to the resolution of their conflict, revealing Willem as a pathetic figure kneeling in the settling dust. He staggers to his feet and mounts his horse with the uncertain movements of a man whose world has collapsed around him, riding alone into the desert night while Elizabeth and Ethan watch from their doorway, knowing that this chapter of their lives has finally reached its conclusion. After Willem's final departure into the desert night, Elizabeth and Ethan settle into married life with its blend of mundane concerns and profound happiness that flows as naturally as the creek that runs through their canyon. Their days unfold with the comfortable rhythm of two people who have found their place in the world and with each other, creating a harmony that neither imagined possible during their years of solitary existence. They tend their garden together, arguing good-naturedly over whether to plant more beans or corn while their hands work the rich soil that feeds both their bodies and their spirits. Elizabeth discovers that she possesses a natural talent for coaxing vegetables from the unforgiving desert earth, while Ethan proves surprisingly skilled at preserving their harvest for the lean months ahead. Their evenings bring the simple pleasures that make life worth living despite its hardships and uncertainties. Ethan teaches Elizabeth the art of wood carving, guiding her hands as she learns to shape pieces of juniper and pine into useful objects for their home. Her first attempts result in laughter and gentle teasing, but gradually her fingers develop the skill to create bowls and spoons that rival his own craftsmanship. Elizabeth sings at dawn while preparing their breakfast, her voice carrying across the valley like a bird announcing the arrival of each new day filled with possibility and promise. The melodies she learned as a child in Texas blend with new songs that seem to spring from her heart, creating music that transforms their humble cabin into something approaching paradise. Another coyote joins their small family, drawn perhaps by the sense of safety and acceptance that emanates from their homestead like warmth from a welcoming fire. The animal becomes a regular visitor, sharing their evening meals and providing companionship during the long desert nights when the wind howls through the canyons with voices that speak of loneliness and isolation. The town of Red Rock gradually accepts their union, with former skeptics acknowledging that Elizabeth has found her proper place in the world rather than continuing to judge her by the standards that once made her an object of ridicule and scorn. Mrs. Perkins visits occasionally, bringing news and supplies while marveling at the transformation that love and acceptance have wrought in the woman who once stood humiliated before the church. Their love reveals itself to be built upon the solid foundation of mutual respect, shared labor, and deep understanding that true beauty and human worth lie not in physical appearance but in the strength of character and kindness of heart that sustain relationships through both prosperity and adversity. Elizabeth stands on the threshold of her home several months later, watching as rare rain falls upon their land like tears of joy from a sky that has finally learned to weep with happiness rather than sorrow. The droplets strike the thirsty earth with gentle persistence, creating the sweet scent of wet desert that rises like incense from an altar dedicated to renewal and redemption. She reflects upon how the storm, once a symbol of her abandonment and pain beside the wooden church in Red Rock, has transformed into a source of cleansing and rebirth that washes away the bitter memories of her humiliation. The same wind that once carried the cruel laughter of townspeople now brings the promise of growth and abundance to the garden she and Ethan have planted together with their own hands. Ethan joins her in the doorway, his weathered arms slipping around her waist as they share a quiet moment of gratitude for the life they have built together through patience, understanding, and the kind of love that grows stronger through adversity rather than weaker. His presence beside her feels as natural as breathing, a completion that requires no words or grand gestures to express its depth and permanence. Elizabeth realizes that she has transformed from a woman who once tried to diminish herself for the approval of others into someone who values her own dignity and inner strength above the fleeting opinions of those who judge based on superficial appearances. The journey from Texas to this remote canyon has become more than a physical relocation, evolving into a spiritual pilgrimage that led her to discover her true worth. The rain that once fell upon her broken heart outside the church now nourishes the soil that she and Ethan worked together, symbolizing how life, its trials can feed and strengthen rather than destroy when they are met with courage and love. Each drop represents a lesson learned, a fear overcome, a moment of growth that contributed to the woman she has become. As thunder rumbles gently in the distance like the contented purring of some great desert cat, Elizabeth understands that her journey is not one of rescue but of self-discovery, not of being saved by another but of learning to save herself. The storm has passed, leaving behind fertile ground where new dreams can take root and flourish under the vast Arizona sky that stretches endlessly toward horizons filled with infinite possibility and hope.